Hello, everybody. Welcome to a kind of spontaneous edition of the Homesteady live show. We had a little bit of a scheduling conflict, so our usual Tuesday night guest decided to jump on Monday night, and we hope that you're able to join us tonight to ask some questions. We're going to do the entire show about preparedness and prepping for the emergencies that you're most likely to experience. We're going to do that entire show tomorrow. But tonight we're going to take some time with our special guest here, JJ Johnson from the Reality Survival Channel, and we're going to talk about with him about his advice to preparedness. So I'm just going to open up the chat box here, make sure we're ready to go over on YouTube. We're a little bit impromptu tonight. We're going to talk. There we go. So we're live there. Let me open up the chat box. And we invite you tonight to join us if you're here watching and have some questions. Go ahead and fill them, fire them off in the chat box. Make sure to tag at Homesteady so that when it's time to cover your questions, we'll be sure to see them stand out in that chat box. So make sure to tag us, and we'll have a section for questions a little bit towards the end of tonight's show. We're going to keep it to about around a half hour tonight, and you can catch the full show tomorrow, which will feature a part of this interview along with some of our story on why we're actually talking about preparedness. So tonight we're going to talk about really practical preparedness. And the reason why what I like to put it, I'm a homesteader first. And as far as the prepping world and prepping goes, I'm a little bit less focused on that as I am on growing the homestead and growing the plants and the animals and all that sort of thing. But being prepared is a very important aspect. The slogan of our show is "The road is rocky, make home steady." The whole idea is that we want to make sure that our homes are a place of security for our family, and homesteading covers a lot of that ground. We can provide a lot of our food from our homesteads. We can provide a lot of our happiness in our life, going outside, working with animals, spending time in the garden. But the fact of the matter is there are emergencies that will come up. And we're not talking tonight about preparing for, the zombie apocalypse. We're talking about emergencies that are likely to happen to all of us. And last week we had actually kind of two of those collide, and we're going to talk more about that tomorrow in tomorrow night's show. But the idea is that every one of us in our lifetime is going to experience one of these three things. We're going to experience a health incident, whether or not it's our own health emergency or a loved one close to us. We may experience a natural disaster. We may experience a loss of a job. And these things, although they might not affect the whole entire world like a pandemic would, and society isn't going to collapse, our personal world may collapse if we're not prepared in practical ways. And like I said, we'll talk about our story and why we're talking about this in tomorrow night's episode. Tonight, we want to spend as much time as we can with our special guest, JJ Johnson from the Reality Survival Channel. JJ talks a lot about preparedness and survival. He covers all kinds of different topics, but I love the fact that his channel is focused on reality survival, so survival for everyday life. So JJ, welcome to Homesteady.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you having me on.
JJ, for those of our audience who have not seen your channel and aren't familiar with you, why don't you just give us a little introduction? Let us know who you are.
Cool. Well, I started out with the Air Force back in 1996, and I joined as a wilderness survival instructor, and so started out there, and then did that for about 4 years, and then cross-trained into the Office of Special Investigations with the Air Force. And so I've been a law enforcement officer with them for about 17 years now. During that time, I've had the opportunity to deploy 5 times, I think, and been to a lot of places all over, the world, and, bad, nasty countries and stuff like that. And I've seen a lot of, how people live in disaster situations,
Yeah.
And so that kind of just led to, I started a blog and a YouTube channel, obviously, and on just regular preparedness, disaster preparedness and all that. I do touch on wilderness survival as well, and I also get into a little bit of gear reviews, for kind of trying to show people what good items are and stuff like that.
JJ has a fantastic channel on YouTube, And we have a link in the description below in this live chat, and we'll have it up in the video afterwards, so you can check out JJ's channel. And it's a fun channel because you have a little bit of everything. You have the practical preparedness, you have the gear reviews. But JJ, you mentioned that you started off, you spent a lot of time as an instructor in wilderness survival. And although that's not what we're going to talk about tonight, I think it ties in because the basic human needs, no matter what we're going through, what we're experiencing, we have basic human needs. When you're in a wilderness survival situation, what are the basic needs that you're worried about?
So your basic thing is, personal protection. You got to keep your core body temperature at 98.6 degrees. You've got to have food, water, and shelter and fire kind of fall within that personal protection zone, because it's basically helping you keep your core temperature. And then you've got to figure out if you need to be able to communicate or navigate. If you need to be able to get out of the situation that you're in, you may have to either communicate or navigate to get out of there. And then the last thing is just your basic health, first aid and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And so, JJ, like, we're going to focus tonight, obviously, we're going to focus on this practical survival and practical preparedness. But really, and it's funny, as we'll talk about more tomorrow, whenever we get into a stress situation, those needs don't really change. We need a shelter, right? In an emergency, maybe in a natural disaster, our actual shelter is an issue. But even in a medical emergency, you need a comfortable place where you can have a little bit less stress, a little bit more calm. You need a little bit of food in your belly just to help you think and help you process, make some hard decisions. So as we get into this tonight, the most basic needs that you focus on in that wilderness survival are no doubt going to play a part. JJ, when you think about practical preparedness, where do you like to focus? What are the disasters or the emergencies that you think are most likely to affect all of us that we need to really think about when talking about preparedness?
Well, I just tried to look at and focus mostly on the high probability, low impact kind of items, and I mean, job loss, house fires, tornadoes, ice storms, these kind of things that happen to people all around us all the time. The statistics just show it happens. I do occasionally talk about some of the low probability, high impact things, but honestly, that's more just to give people a longer term goal to talk to work towards, to be a little bit more prepared. But the majority of the stuff that I try to focus on is really just getting folks to understand that regionalized disasters can happen, and they can affect you for an extended period of time sometimes. So it's good to have a few things prepared, because the government's just not always going to be a real reliable source of help.
Right. When you expect others to take care of your immediate needs, you're putting yourself into a victim position right away. Absolutely. And how much better to be the person who not only is prepared for himself and for his immediate family, but you can even be, if you're prepared enough, you can help those around you.
Absolutely. Yep, that's right.
So that idea, I was writing my list down tonight, JJ, and I talked on my list. I put a lot of the same things you did. The first one, and this is not one that people think about when they think about prepping all the time, at least not everyone, but job loss. What disrupts your life more than losing a job, especially if you're not prepared? Mm-hmm. If you're prepared, if you have an emergency fund set aside, well, then that's a different story. But if you're not prepared, suddenly you're without your income. If you're living like, unfortunately, a lot of people do, paycheck to paycheck, that can quickly cause a personal collapse. So when you think about something like a job loss, JJ, what is your advice as far as practical preparedness for that situation?
So I guess the first thing is, and actually this wasn't on my list, but it just popped in my head, so I'm going to throw it out there. But and it's something that I do personally, but I think everybody should do it, is, keep your resume up to date. Nice. And have a network of people that you're always talking to, so that if you do lose your job, you can, because it's not about who, or it is about who when it comes to getting a job. But other than that, as far as keeping money, I try to keep a minimum of at least $1,000 of cash in the house. And then not so much for the job, but in case of a vehicle breakdown or something, I try to keep at least $100 in the car as well, because right now we're not in a collapsed society or anything. Money usually solves most problems, and and that's the first one. And the second one is I try to keep at least, I recommend a very minimum of at least 1 month's worth of monthly expenses in your emergency fund, but really trying to get towards 3 to 6 months is, probably a better figure. And if you could do a whole year, that'd be great, but that's a big goal for most people, but 3 to 6 is probably attainable if you really kind of dedicate yourself and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I don't know if you're familiar. You ever read any of Dave Ramsey's books, JJ?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So everyone, the $1,000 emergency fund, that's where he starts you. And it's so important that before he says worry about paying off your debts, and before you worry about taking care of, your car payment, all that other stuff, $1,000 emergency fund. And the reason why he says is because of Murphy's Law. The worst thing that could go happen is probably going to happen. And if you have $1,000 set aside where something bad happens and you just, your well, we had a couple years back at the homestead here, our well went, and we didn't have $1,000 emergency fund. And of course we had to borrow money to take care of that problem. And when you borrow money, now you're in debt. Now you got to pay more of that money back. How much better to have that $1,000 set aside? And for some people that may seem like an impossibility, but you stop eating out a few times a month. You stop with the coffee out each morning, you make your own, and you can start putting that money aside to where it builds up to you have that $1,000. Now, JJ, why do you make sure to have 1,000 in your home?
So for me, it's just because I just like to have physical cash. You know what I'm saying? And I do, like I said, I do try to keep a separate amount in my bank account as well. So it's kind of a both system. If I, for whatever reason, can't access the internet, if I, to do online banking or whatever, then I've got the money there in my house, just in case. It's just kind of a redundancy thing, I guess. But it just feels better to have the cash there, I guess,
I totally agree. And we do the same thing. We have our emergency fund. We have a couple different emergency funds, some in cash, some in the bank. Even like you said, having some in the car. That way, if you have a breakdown, let's say you have some in the safe, but you have a breakdown and you're a couple states over, and for some reason maybe you don't have even a credit card on you, or your bank card or whatever. That's nice to have that cash.
If somebody stole your wallet, or there's just lots of different possibilities.
We're going to talk about in our story tomorrow. We had two. We had the natural disaster, which wasn't quite a natural disaster. We had a blizzard, but coincide with a medical emergency. So it can happen. You can have a wallet stolen and a car breakdown, and you'll be so grateful that if you have that cash in the car, the cash maybe in the go bag, wherever you have it, having a diverse amount of cash where you can get yourself out of a trouble. And like you said, JJ, we're not in a collapse situation. We don't need to barter for help. Most of the time, the emergencies we're going to face, a lot of the time cash is going to fix the problem. So having that emergency fund, that is a major way to be practically prepared. And for me, I remember we started really this year getting into the prepping thing, getting into being more prepared. And a lot of the things were overwhelming, but $1,000 emergency fund in cash, it may be hard to do, but it's not complicated. It might be hard to save that money, but it's simple. Just stop eating out and start putting the money in an envelope.
I think the biggest thing is that a lot of preppers tend to focus on gear, and gear is an important part of it. It makes life easier in certain circumstances, but you really have to stop and establish your priorities first. And when you do that, you'll see that that $1,000 emergency fund is really more important than your fire kit or whatever. It's just you have to look at it as one piece of that puzzle. It's a tangible thing, just like a fire starter or a knife or something else.
Yeah. 2 out of the 3, the emergencies I wrote down to talk about, losing the job, medical emergency, and then the natural disaster. 2 out of the 3, medical emergencies and losing the job, the financial side is so much more important than any gear or any other items. Unless the medical emergency happens in the woods, then maybe some of your gear is going to be important. So now let's talk about the next step. I remember when we were started down this path of preparedness, JJ, we started with the financial side. We had to be able to afford all the other preparedness items. So the emergency fund's kind of that early stage preparedness. Then I started working on prepping my person. And I started that with kind of some EDC, everyday carry, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, EDC. So items that you keep on you every day, and then putting together the go bag or the get home bag. So JJ, when it comes to getting past the financial side, what are the gear and the items that you want to start building up for practical preparedness, things that you will find yourself using?
So I guess the main thing is when you're building your go bag or your get home bag, especially, you really need to look at how far do you work from your home. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
a person who, drives 65, 70 miles to work every day has a completely different get home bag than somebody who works 2 or 3 miles. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I mean, some of the basic stuff, is going to be tennis shoes, especially if you dress up or anything like that, and you don't want to have to walk a long distance, in dress shoes or whatever. Extra set of clothing, that's always nice. I mean, even if you have a car breakdown or something like that, if you have to change a tire and you wear a suit, then it's kind of nice to, be able to change your clothes. I like to have self-defense items, there's a numerous different variety of reasons why you could end up having to walk home. But you don't ever want to not be able to defend yourself, so again, that's also dependent on where you live and what kind of neighborhood you have to go through and all that kind of stuff. But basic food and water. And then depending on how far you live, you may need to have some overnight gear. It's possible. But again, that's just dependent. The other one that a lot of people don't think about is an alternate form of communication. Maybe a GMRS radio, again, depending, it's kind of distance dependent. Or one of those spot GPS transmitters that you can send text messages through. If there's like there's a terrorist incident or something along those lines, cell services and cell networks are going to be all blocked up. You may not be able to get messages through, but using a satellite system, you can send a text, say, hey, I'm okay, or I'm on my way home, or, whatever the case may be. They allow you, some of those different GPS devices allow you a few different canned messages. So at least you can get the message, out to your other loved ones, hopefully, and they can kind of see what's going on.
JJ, the idea behind a go bag and a get home bag, the basic principle behind the two, what is the point of having this bag?
So with a go bag, I see them a little bit as different, but they're kind of the same, really. The go bag is usually spoken about with something that you keep in your house, and you're going to have most people will say 3 or 4 days, something like that, worth of food and water and supplies in it, so that if you had to leave your home, like let's say your house caught on fire, you could just grab your bag and your kids, of course, and get out of the house. And if you had to, you could just literally set up a tent right there, and you'd be okay for a few days until you got, stuff taken care of or whatever. And a get home bag is usually the same kind of thing, but it's just usually a little smaller, a little bit more compact, something you're going to throw in the vehicle. That way, if you break down on the way home, or if for whatever reason roads are closed off, or there's an ice storm and you have to leave your car sitting there, or, who knows what could be the reason, but for some reason you had to walk from home, then you'd have some stuff with you to be able to do that.
So these bags, I remember when we started assembling ours, again, sometimes especially if you're a new beginner, there's this overwhelm of, oh man, there's so many things I need to think of and so many things I need to put in this bag. And I'm reading Amazon reviews. Is this better than this? And I want to freeze. There are pre-made go bags, and then there's the idea of assembling your own. What do you suggest, JJ? What is the best thing to do? Is it to get a pre-made, or is it to get something you assemble yourself?
So I haven't. I've kind of looked actually pretty hard for this to find a good pre-made bag, and I just haven't had any luck finding anything that really met my personal standards.
Yeah.
So I think it's best to put one together yourself, because you're the only person that knows your situation, and everything's going to be very dependent upon where you live, your geography, your topography, your physical abilities, all those kinds of things is going to kind of determine about, what you have to put into your kit. So it makes the most sense to me to put one together yourself.
I agree so much. I know if there's the overwhelm element, and people are like, you know what, I just want to buy a go bag and put it in my car. That's probably better than nothing. But the kits aren't going to have an extra set of clothes for you. They're not going to have a set of shoes for you. They're not going to have food that you like to eat. There's not going to be comfort in that bag. And I think the worst thing about the pre-made bag, JJ, and you tell me if you agree with this, is the fact that I think too many people would just buy it, throw it in the back of the car, and forget about it. Almost to the point where they might not even remember they have it when they need it. And they certainly won't know what's in there and how to use it. Would you agree with that, JJ?
Yep, I would absolutely agree with that. I think the one thing I would add to that is that honestly, most of the components in the pre-made kits are just not that good.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just not high quality, and so, I just don't buy them. And maybe one of these days I'll find one. You know what I mean? But I haven't yet, and it's unfortunate. But
It would be easy to, find one to put a little Amazon affiliate link on and make some money from it. But if there's just nothing good out there, there's nothing right out there, it'd be better to just to find the right gear to put in. And I know you do a lot of gear reviews and a lot of things by your channel to help people with that. How do you suggest, JJ, now that we've told them, hey guys, you can't go buy a pre-made one, you got to put your own together, that can be overwhelming. How do you get people, where should they start as far as a basic backpack with supplies they need? Where do they start?
so I think if we can go here, I would say before you even start putting a pack together, there's a little bit you need to do. And I did a video about this called How to Start Prepping. And it basically talked about 16 different points that I recommend that people should do before they start buying anything. So I'll just go over 4 here, and then if folks want to go check out the video, they can do that.
We'll
The first
do it.
Okay, cool. The first one is do some research and find out, what sort of real emergencies happen in your area. If you haven't looked into it, you may be surprised, and most people would generally know this. Like if you live in Florida, you're going to have hurricanes, but take a look at that and get some hard numbers on it and understand the environment you live in. The second thing is conduct an audit of your personal finances and kind of establish what your discretionary income is each month. And that way you'll kind of be able to forecast how you're going to go about buying this stuff. The next thing is I think that people should identify multiple hotels in each cardinal direction that are at least 100 miles or so from their home, and put their addresses and their phone numbers and all that stuff down in a hard binder. Create a hard binder to start having some information in, because if you have a regionalized disaster, like let's just take Hurricane Katrina, for example, if people had done this ahead of time and they're like, hey, a hurricane's coming, all right, well, let's head north. You can call the hotel before the disaster gets bad, make your reservation, and go and stay in the hotel, and you're out of the area and you're safe and you don't have to worry about it. You know what I mean? Because with a lot of things, there's usually some kind of notice. You know what I mean? So having a kind of a plan on where you may want to go if there's an issue that causes you to leave your home, you know what I mean? Which that's obviously preferred to stay in your home, but if you do have to leave, it's better to do that and stay in a hotel or a national park, like at a campground or something, than it is just to go out into the woods. You know what I mean? Some place you've never been before. So trying to keep that a little practical. The next thing is study the geography around your residence, so that if you do have to stay in your home for a prolonged period, for whatever it is, you know where some fresh water sources are. You just kind of know what's around your home. You'd be surprised at how many people don't really know what's beyond just the neighbors in their street and stuff like that. So it's kind of important to do that. But then once you get those things done, and like I said, I've a pretty long list of some other things, then you can start looking at, going ahead and buying a few items. One of the first things that I recommend is a first aid kit. Physical injury is, one of the leading things that causes us to have emergency situations, and so I think that's important. I put in the top 5, I also put a 9mm pistol. And I think that just a regular pistol with 100 rounds of ammo or so is a very practical way to be able to start defending your home. You can also start to conceal carry that if it's allowed in your state and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, especially in today's day and age, is that being able to defend your home is important, because especially those people who live in urban city centers and stuff, we've seen a lot of riots, we've seen a lot of different, things that, bad things happen. And so it's good to be able to just be prepared and defend yourself. The next thing I recommend is 1 month worth of emergency food per person in your home. And I'm a little different than a lot of preppers and survivalists, whereas I recommend that the first month that you buy should be like, dehydrated or freeze-dried food that you can put in a box, you can put it in the back of your closet, and you can forget about it and not have to pull it out until an emergency. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people will recommend just eating from your pantry and you store what you eat, which is the second thing that I recommend. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times what I find is that people kind of go in hills and lulls when it comes to prepping. And a lot of times your stock, the food that you've stocked up, the levels will vary. And if you have an emergency when the levels are low, well, then you're kind of screwed. You know what I mean? And you may be lower on it. And, people just, unless you're one of those obsessive compulsive kind of people that always keep everything perfectly stocked and full, then I think it's good just to have that fallback, because that stuff, that dehydrated and freeze-dried food, I mean, it'll last 25, 30 years.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
You make that good investment, you stick it back in the back corner, and you always have it. You don't have to worry about it. And so I think that's kind of important. And the last thing is on the first 5 items that I recommend is just a backpack for every person in your home. And you can kind of start to use that to develop your go bag. And even if you don't have everything that you need for the perfect go bag, if you've got a backpack, you've probably got most of the items around your house that you would need to just toss in there, and be able to go if you had to.
When we started, like I said, JJ, we really started this year. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Because of a little emergency, I started getting into being more prepared. And sure enough, as I got more prepared, another little emergency. I was out deer hunting. I got a nice buck, and I was field dressing the buck. I slipped, stabbed myself in the leg with my knife, but I had my little first aid kit right on my hip, my little everyday carry kit with my, quick clot, granules in the packet. So I was able to stop the bleeding right away. It wasn't a real bad cut, but I didn't know that. It was pitch black, and I felt the knife go into my leg, and I was ready.
Sure.
And after that, we built up our go bags more. So every little bit you get more prepared, it's almost addictive. You get a little bit more prepared, then it fixes a problem. You get excited, you get a little bit more prepared. But it's true, you can go through waves, because we got to this point where we finally had built up an emergency fund. We built up some nice go bags to the point where the back of the car we had our go bags, we had extra supplies in the back of the car, and then we kind of stopped. And it almost was to the point where we were losing interest in it. And then last week we had this blizzard, and then prepping for that, we had my son had an emergency medical operation, my 8-month-old, and we had to rush him to the hospital for it. And so it all kind of collided. And having the go bags when that happened, and what you said was so important, we had a go bag for every family member. We had a backpack. And again, it wasn't a pre-made go bag. It wasn't a tactical pack. We went to LL Bean and we bought all our go bags at LL Bean. And we did that because LL Bean has incredible quality stuff and they have a lifetime guarantee. So we figured with a go bag, you're going to be like shoving it in the car and grabbing it and, running or whatever you're doing with it. It could take a beating, And as long as society doesn't collapse, we'll be able to return that go bag.
Yeah.
And we started filling up the go bags with food, with a change of clothes, with a pair of, full change of clothes, toothbrush, just the basic essentials, a little bit of money. And then, we also have our rope in there and our knives and our fire starting stuff and our survival blankets. But sure enough, when we went to the hospital because of my son, my other kids had to get taken with a family friend. They all had they had their go bag. They had a change of clothes. So I told them, grab your go bags. If you need to spend the night, you'll have a change of clothes and a toothbrush. My wife and me got stuck all day long waiting for this operation. You don't want to run out and get pizza while you're waiting for your kid to get operated on. Fortunately, we had a bag with some just a couple meals and a couple of candy bars, and it allowed us to stay ahead of the hunger, and it kept us cool and calm in a situation where our personal world was crumbling. So it can be overwhelming, but that's great advice. All the areas that you said to start with, JJ, you don't have to spend any money for. Learning about your area, just preparing a plan, taking, like you said, a stock at what you already have in your house and filling it into a backpack. And then at that point, you can start moving forward. So great advice, JJ. I would love to be able to take some questions now. So I know we have a bunch of you guys in the live chat here. There's 20 watching. If you have any questions, go ahead and tag at Homesteady, and we'll be able to answer some of your questions. I'm keeping an eye out. So let us know if you guys have any questions. JJ, you had great advice for how to start. I got 2 more questions that I wanted to cover tonight. And then at that point, we'll let people go and check out your channel and dive into this subject. And I put a link below for that video, how to start prepping, that JJ talked about. When a person has no preps, and you already kind of told us how to start prepping, but when they have nothing preparedness-wise, what is the first thing? If you could pick one item or one step, what is the very first step?
So probably the first thing, I guess, would be, develop a family communication plan. It's not buying anything, but having the phone. I briefly referred to it earlier, but having the phone numbers of all your family members. Having pictures of your family members. Actually printed out pictures. Front on and profile. The license plate, if you've got kids that drive, the license plate of the vehicle that your kids drive, the addresses and phone numbers of your, relatives that live in the area or your friends that live in the area, as well as the addresses and phone numbers and card descriptions of friends of your children, places that they, if you were to get separated in an emergency, this kind of stuff could be really important, being able to identify, what your son looks like to the authorities and all that kind of stuff, or, those kind of things. Also, if cell networks go down, if your battery runs dead, having an extra battery is good. But if your cell battery goes dead and you can't remember their phone number, then it's difficult to get in touch with people, and so having that stuff written down so that you could use somebody else's phone if it was necessary or something is kind of an important step. And it's not hard to do, but it could become, valuable in an emergency situation.
That's such good advice, JJ. Here we were rushing to the hospital. Our phones were both almost dead because it was just an everyday day. We were just up and about using the phone and running out. We forgot to grab a charger. And that was one thing I didn't have in the go bag. And now it's in the go bag, all the go bags. But the phone could die. And if you don't have the phone numbers, and I love the idea of the pictures, because we all think, oh, I'll just be able to show my phone and say, hey, have you seen this person? But if the phone's dead, we live in a different world. I remember my home phone number growing up, but I hardly remember my number now.
Right. I'm the same way. I got to write it down. I'm getting old and gray.
Yep.
I got to write stuff down. So
JJ, I got a question from one of our listeners here. It's Davida Kilgore. Davida. She says, what about gathering antibiotics for med kits? Any advice there, JJ?
So obviously the best thing that you can do is if you find a doctor that's willing to work with you, then you can do that, and you can try to get them to prescribe some to you. That when the grid is up and society is normal is the right answer. The only people that I know that are willing to work with you like that right now is a company called MedCall Assist. And they're kind of a cool company. I did a review on one of their packs a long time ago, but they'll actually, if you buy their pack, they actually assign a doctor to you, and then they can establish a patient-client relationship with you so that they can help prescribe stuff for you. So, and they're preppers, they're survivalists. They kind of know, what I mean, why people would want to do this stuff. The hardest thing with antibiotics is really knowing which stuff you need. And I say that because different antibiotics are for different kinds of, issues. So working with a doctor is the best answer. The second answer to that is that you can look into fish antibiotics or bird antibiotics. There's a number of different things. And before you do this, what I would recommend people do is go to Doc Bones and Nurse Amy's YouTube channel, and they've written a book on it that has a section in it. I've covered it on my channel before, and then they also have made some videos that talk about fish antibiotics. And those are a good option to get, but technically you're not supposed to use those unless there's been a massive emergency or whatever the case may be. But honestly, to be real about it, for most situations where we're talking about localized or regionalized disasters, you're probably not going to need antibiotics. If you're looking for more long-term societal collapse, economic collapse, grid down situation, absolutely. I mean, I'd recommend putting money into that if that's what you're prepping for. But for just the kind of reality situations of what we see in normal society, you're probably not going to need antibiotics. Because even if your area is affected, you'll most likely be able to travel to another area and get to a doctor, and that kind of thing.
That's not what we would put under the practical prepping segment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more long term. You know what I'm saying? I mean, a little bit more of a, worried about long term issues. But.
What about we had a couple people asking when you were talking about food storage. They mentioned canning and dehydrating as a method to stocking your pantry or doing it yourself. Have you ever done any work with? Do you do any canning or dehydrating on your own, JJ?
So I haven't done a whole lot of it yet, but I told you the other night on our review that I'm getting ready to move out to a farm, so yeah. I'm going to definitely be learning more about that. My parents canned when I was a kid. My mom did, and so I saw it when I was younger and helped her and stuff like that. But I wasn't really old enough to fully know and understand exactly how to do it. So I'm hoping to get acquainted with that, and it's an excellent thing to do. And it, especially for people who are on a budget, seeds don't cost very much, and raising a garden doesn't cost very much, and it's a great way to be able to put back some calories, just in case of emergencies.
Awesome, great advice. All right, JJ, I think we've got all the questions covered. Thank you, everyone, who are joining us tonight. If there's any more questions, there's still time to fire one or two more out. One more question I have for you, JJ. The overwhelm, right? The overwhelm that can come when you start down this path of trying to be prepared. How do you find any advice for how to make this prepping lifestyle less overwhelming?
So if you start with the research, like we talked about before, and you develop a plan that's going to work for you, and then the next aspect of that is when you start to buy, just stay within your budget. Don't go into debt for prepping items and stuff like that. It's a bad idea because it's kind of an addictive thing that can lead to bad situations. So the next thing is then take a look at your plan, whatever it is that you've developed for your situation, and look at what is the most important item first. What can be used in the most situations, what's the most likely disaster going to be that you would be faced with, and then prioritize the items and just buy a couple at a time, down the list until you feel like you've rounded out your plan pretty well. If you look at it from a kind of a strategic kind of level like that, like a military planner kind of thing, and then kind of stick to that, that's going to help you start down that road. It's really, really easy to get to do fear buying, panic and fear and all that kind of stuff. You watch YouTube videos and stuff like that, and there are a lot of people that are very fear based that talk about major disasters and martial law and all this kind of stuff, and just stuff that is really a distraction to what real prepping is all about. And just try to focus on reality for your situation and what you need to do. And if you do that, it'll be fairly easy to stay focused, I think.
That's great advice, JJ. That's spot on. I think prepping so that you can have a little peace of mind and enjoy your life to the point where if you don't use your preps in emergencies, but you have them there for, hey, the car breaks down, you reach into your go bag and you grab a Snickers. It just makes life a little bit better, and you don't have to focus on the fear side of things. So great point. Thank to everyone who joined us tonight. We have a lot of people in the chat box. Rocky Brook, Farmstead, Davita, Blondie, Smiles. Let's see who else. Thank you all for joining us. Back earlier on, we had the Weekend Homestead. Bob, I think that is Algonquin Homestead. Denise Rodriguez. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. If you'd like to check out JJ's channel, it's Reality Survival. JJ, where can they learn more about what you do?
So you can go to realitysurvival.com, or you can just hit up the Reality Survival YouTube channel, and pretty much at Reality Survival on any social media platform will get you, back to any of my pages.
Awesome. So guys, definitely check out what JJ is doing. He has an awesome channel, and it is not fear focused. It is reality survival for stuff that you probably are going to experience at some point. And if you follow his advice, he makes it a lot easier and less overwhelming for people like me who are like, what am I going to do? So thanks for joining us tonight, guys. We will have the regular show tomorrow night. Like I said, we just had a little bit of a booking issue. And in tomorrow night's show, we will be playing some of the excerpts from this so that everyone gets to see JJ's advice here. JJ, thanks for taking the time with us to answer these questions. And like we said, everybody, go check out Reality Survival, and you won't regret that. Well, guys, we'll see you tomorrow night at 9 for a regular show. And until then, the road is rocky. Make home steady.